This is our final presentation of the conference. So I'm sure that all of you will be familiar with Colin Prior's work. I've known Colin's work for at least 30 years, and I've known Colin personally for over 20 years. So it gives me huge pleasure to introduce Colin Prior. Colin, great to see you. And looking forward to this very much. I think before we kick off into the pictures, the first question would just be a little bit about your origins as a photographer, because although people are obviously familiar with your work, we maybe don't know so much about how you got started.
Well, it began, funnily enough, under the water and not on mountains, as many people might imagine. And back in 1981, I won a little competition called Camera Beneath the Waves, and it was run by Diver magazine, and I got Best Newcomer to Underwater Photography. And it just came at the right moment in my life. I was working in my father's company. It wasn't his company, as an operations manager, and I realised that I couldn't live my life under his shadow, and that I would need to go off and do something myself. And it was a catalyst, and I jumped. I mean, we heard Nick talk earlier there about making that step of faith, and I had to do exactly the same thing. So I realised, of course, that I couldn't make my living as a professional underwater photographer, because I saw there being very little difference between calling oneself a professional underwater photographer and a beach bum. Particularly if you were out in some of the dive resorts in the more exotic parts of the world. So I started off freelancing for newspapers, provincial newspapers, photographing everything from brownies to local football matches and schools, everything that a local newspaper covers. But I very quickly found myself working as a commercial photographer, and that happened quite rapidly. After, I might add, I spent about a year offshore as a photo technician in the North Sea. But I realised that if I remained out there as a photo technician, you kind of get, it's that salary trap. You can't unlock yourself from going offshore. And I quit that and come back and set myself up as a freelance. And I was extremely lucky. This would have been round about 83. There was a lot of commercial work around at the time.
We'll just get you looking at the camera more if we can. Good stuff. We need your handsome face there.
I worked for a group of ad agencies, and I had a friend who was a bit older than me at school, and he was a staff photographer in there, and when I turned up, his boss was delighted, because they had a lot of big clients, and they said to his boss, "I don't care what photographer you send, but don't send him." So he used to send me, and back then when I started up, we were earning daily rates that were parallel with doctors and lawyers' rates. That doesn't happen now, unfortunately. Things have changed, but it was a great beginning.
Great way to start. And interestingly, in spite of that, and I presume that would have been a 35mm based start, very quickly you adopted the panoramic format, or so it seems. And is that specifically because you developed an interest in mountains? Which came first, the panoramic format or the mountains?
Well, my interest always really been about the natural world, and I kind of worked out that for me, mountains offered one of the best ways to express that, because you've got these shapes and profiles that rise from the ground, and if you can match that with great light, it's that's the real challenge. But the panoramic format was something that always fascinated me. That 3:1 format just was an amazing, it still is an amazing way to capture landscape. And it's important to remember, it's it's a wide view the camera takes, but it's not a wide angle because, as you know, it's a 90mm on that and 180mm lenses that are used on that camera. So you've got this wide format, which is 3:1, which is so good for landscape. And you've got telephotos essentially on that can cover that 6:17. The cameras used roll film, 120 roll film, which would be used in any medium format camera. So a Hasselblad would shoot 12 images, but the 6:17 shot 4. And it was just so exciting to get the images back, as I'm sure you remember. You know, you might have 20 sheets there and you would very, very quickly scan through them on a light box in the lab, and just to make sure that there wasn't either any processing problems or you'd got the exposure quite considerably wrong. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But it always amazed me because, you know, even on that very quick scan, you'd think, oh, that looks quite good, and oh, that was really good too. And when you went back and crawled over them, the images announced themselves immediately, you know. And that's what I say to people, if you have to ask yourself, did I get that picture? The answer's always no. Because when you get a great picture, it announces itself and it says, look what you've done. You're so clever. And it's that great feeling. It doesn't happen very often, as we know.
Well, speaking of which, would you like to show your first picture?
Oh, well, okay. This really was the first big shot that I took at elevation. And I was there with my father that evening, and we climbed up to the summit of Ben Starav, which is up here. I don't know if I can get that magnifier to work. That I can't because there's no software in it. But that's the summit of Ben Starav there. And, you know, I had a leather jacket on, and we were exactly dressed as model mountaineers, I might add. But the sun had been held back all day by this cirrus cloud, and as it moved across the sky, the cirrus formed up behind it. So it was enormously frustrating. You couldn't get light onto the landscape, but there was a band of light, a band of clear air above the horizon, and I knew the sun would need to drop through that. And when it did, it just illuminated that landscape with light that I don't think I've ever seen since. I mean, I've been on a lot of mountains and a lot of sunrises and sunsets, but the light that evening was visceral. It was just incredible. And amazingly, just to sort of crown this experience, there were 2 golden eagles that soared. That mountain in the background, there's Bidian am Bain, which is, you know, the biggest there in Glencoe. So we're looking into the back of Glencoe there. And these eagles were in that light, they were golden eagles. And I wanted them out the shot because I was at a second at F22. I wanted them out. And my father was saying, get the eagles, get the eagles. Yeah, a second, right. But I've got that image imprinted in my brain. I mean, it'll never manifest itself. But if you had a digital camera now, you know, if you had a Canon 1DX Mark II and a 500mm lens, you could have pulled out these eagles in that golden light with high ISO now. I mean, that's the beauty of digital technology. It has liberated photographers, particularly wildlife photographers.
We're going to see a few more mountains, I think.
I hope so. That was the last panorama that I shot. I sold these cameras in 2010. And it was a combination of the frustration of processing film, you know, having to get couriered to Metro, and then it coming back special delivery. And then you would chop 2, maybe 3 images out of what you shot, and it'd go back south for scanning thereafter. But that was midsummer's evening on the summit of Blavin. And the mountain on the left, as some of you will recognise, a very distinctive profile of Marsco. And the high point in the middle of the image is the Stour. So you're looking at Rassay, and that's Duncan, the highest point on Rassay there. And this is all the Red Coolin that we're looking at, Clach and the Red Coolin. So it's got so much visual impact, and it's because of that 90mm lens. And people would say to me, well, I've got a 35mm camera, and the angle of view with my 18mm is the same, so that'll be the same. No, it'll never be the same, because it's 18mm, this is 90mm. And that's the fundamental difference between the visual impact that that camera was able to deliver compared with smaller formats. Again, that was back in '89. It's Stob Cornish and Lochan with the Anach Egach Ridge behind. Very, very simple picture. And that's the mistake, in my opinion, that many photographers made with this camera, because it's got such a wide visual field. But you've got to simplify the pictures. It's what can I subtract from this picture to make it more powerful, not what can I get in. And this is why, you know, I kind of always argue against ultra-wide angle lenses. You know, unless you're going to do aurora pictures or night shots, you don't want to go wider than 28. You know, some people shoot 24, because people imagine you're going to get more visual impact from a 16mm lens, but you're not. It's going to get less impact, because everything in that image is going to be reduced to a much smaller size. So that's why you know, I believe that you should use, you know, a 28mm, sometimes 24 if you want, but the tighter the better. So if you look at that picture, it's really simple. It's two triangles, one in shadow and it's quite dark, quite cold, and the other is in light and it's warm. So you've got that hot, cold, light, dark thing going on. Really, really simple image.
Liach?
Indeed.
Turden.
Yeah, that was a memorable evening. It was a bit cool up there, as you can imagine, and it was, you know, it was sort of mid-November, and I kind of had been driving past Liach for years, and I knew there was that picture there, and I thought, I'm going to have to go and do that before I fall out the tree. And I climbed up there and I camped overnight, and you know, I thought I'll take advantage of every opportunity, and I was camped in a tiny little ridge, and I thought I'll do it because the moon was out. I thought I'll leave the camera with the shutter open all night. So I made some food in a rather lukewarm, you know, way, and I got into the sleeping bag, and I had my down jacket on top of me, and the camera was outside the tent, you know, exposing, and I lay in the tent, and the wind got stronger and stronger and stronger, and I thought, I'm gonna have to go and get that bloody camera down. And you know, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but when you've got nothing on and you've got to go out into these sub-zero temperatures, and I stupidly went out in my bare feet. Anyway, I got the camera in because I thought, if I don't, it's going to be broken, and there's going to be the best sunrise that you know, mankind has seen, and I'm not going to have a camera. So I got up pre-dawn, and that picture really, you know, it's not often that a picture supersedes your pre-visualization for an image, but on that morning it did, because what you're seeing there is the Earth's shadow, the shadow of the Earth projected in the atmosphere over 180 degrees. So that the sun's fundamentally under the horizon. It hasn't. This is 20 minutes before sunrise, but the infrared, the long wavelengths, infrared light rays are hitting the upper atmosphere. So you get what's known as the belt of Venus, or the anti-twilight arch, and below it is the shadow of the Earth. And as the sun approaches the horizon, the Earth's shadow, unsurprisingly, falls. And this image, which we've corresponded about, is the reverse. That's at sunset, taken from Stob Gar. And
I'm in that picture.
Yes, you're in that picture. You're in that picture. I mean, it was quite an amazing night. This is Lochan na Achilles down here, which I'm sure most of you have stopped at some stage over your photographic careers, and Loch Ba on the other side of the road going towards Glencoe. And a number of years ago, I mean, it was 15 years ago, a woman called me, and she'd seen this photograph when it was published in Scotland, The Wild Places, and her husband died that evening on Stobcorin and Lochard, which that overlooks in a climbing accident. Just the image with the triangles. I was it was on Biddy actually. So where I was on that evening, he tragically died that evening. So just your story and
yeah, a very interesting one for me too was that when I realised, and I have exactly the same moon in my photograph, but I was much lower down. That was the evening I heard one of my best friends had just died in a mountaineering accident in the Caucasus in Russia.
I remember you.
Yeah, so it was a very poignant experience. It means a lot to me too, that picture. One more thing, Colin, just looking at these twilight images too, is that I think you and I were both very influenced by Galen Roll. I think Mountain Light, in fact, wasn't it? And is that where you felt you were able to learn and articulate the mechanism, the geophysics, if you like, of light, and the way that it works for us as mountain photographers?
Yeah, absolutely. Galen was a huge influence in my early career. In fact, even before I got into photography, I discovered his first book, which was called In the Throne Room of the Mountain Gods, and it was about the American 1975 expedition to K2, which was unsuccessful. But Galen had, and there was quite a lot of falling out in the climbing team, but Galen gathered the diaries of all the climbers and collated them and did a sort of brief history of exploration in the Karakoram. And so that was my first introduction to Galen, and some of the pictures, I mean, that was really the inspiration to go to the Karakoram, which we're going to talk about later. But and I think it was 85 or 86, he published Mountain Light, and at the time 35mm was the camera that most photojournalists used, and he was a great believer in using small cameras and pro lenses on them, particularly when he was climbing. And it was the one thing I disagreed with him about, and funnily enough, Joe and I independently worked out that large format cameras were far more preferable because of the quality of reproduction in print that you could get from these bigger negatives or transparencies. And that's why we struggled on with that larger, heavier equipment, simply because it produced images with far more detail. But Galen really, I suppose, was the first photographer that brought us the whole idea of dusk and dawn photography.
Well, he wrote brilliantly about it too, didn't he? How explaining the mechanisms of it, and helped to give you a kind of framework of working, especially if you wanted to make pictures that had those kind of color relationships. So I found it tremendously helpful.
It was great. And when I saw that book, I thought, I can do that in Scotland. What he's done internationally, I thought, I'm going to get this camera. Well, that was the camera that I used latterly. I started off with a Linhof, and it was Linhof that designed and manufactured that camera. It was their idea and concept, and the Japanese, as they do with most things, is they copied it and improved it. And for me, the reason that I used this camera was because of these bumper bars in the front of it, because the Linhof, I had a couple of shutters put in it, because you essentially have a shutter that's sandwiched between a big lump of glass and a big lump of metal, and it just needs the slightest nudge in a camera bag, and you've not got sharpness throughout your transparency. So this ensured that the lens would never really get hit inadvertently if you fall or slip, which happened, not infrequently. So
it's interesting to note, by the way, too, that the width of 617 is almost as wide as 10x8 film.
Yeah. It's got that impact, and you've got that natural cropping in there. You don't have the foregrounds to worry about, and you actually didn't really have to worry too much about skies blowing out, because there was that natural crop in the sky anyway. That's from Drumfada on the north side of Loch Hourn, looking down Loch Hourn into the Sound Asleep and onto the Coolin Ridge. You've got Blavan right in the middle there, Garsvin at the end, and you can see just to the right of Blavan, which is in the middle, there's a kind of pointed mountain, that's Scourn and Gillian, which the Sligagan Hotel sits underneath, basically. So Ben Screal is just out of shot on the right there. So as I say, that's the 180. That's Loch Hourn, and the stands of pines down there. And I've deliberately left that midgie in the sky because my father was with me that evening as well, and we walked through the heather, and you can see there's not a ripple on Loch Hourn. And clouds of midges come out, and he said to me, I mean, you know, we were trying to keep them, you know, away from the front of the lens. He said, you must have 3,000 midges stuck to your back. And as I say, 4 shots in a roll of 120, and when you took the film out, the midges were going inside the camera, and that's one of them. Fame, like a fly in amber. And Blavan, that image is in the front of Highlight, which some of you may have, and it's rather unfortunate because Constable, who published 7 of my books over the years, were bought in 2014 by Little Brown and don't exist anymore. You know, 58 people just disappeared overnight, and contacts that I had built up throughout my life have gone elsewhere. So the publishing industry, like so many others, have you know, they've suffered from consolidation, and so that's why I don't have any of these books with me today.
Yeah, this portfolio, which has turned into these great books, was also presumably the way that you acquired your British Airways commission, which has also been a huge element of your career, has it not?
Yeah, very much, Joe. And you know, as I say, I came into professional photography, and I got this opportunity to build a business, and I was busy, and I ended up working in the exhibition industry, trade exhibitions. I was a contractor in you know, NEC, Earls Court, Olympia, and you know, the big exhibitors manual. I've got carpet fitters and electricians and florists and photographers, and it was a very lucrative scene to be in. And I had 3 photographers that worked for me as freelancers, and we did about 44 exhibitions a year all over the country. So, you know, I'm not at home as often as I would like to be, but I've always been like that. I've had to go where the work was. But for the first 10 years of my career, I didn't take any pictures for me. I never forgot about what I wanted to do. I just put it to one side, and I got on with building a business. And it wasn't really till that I gathered some momentum with the business and you know, was feeling a bit more secure, that I bought that panoramic camera, and I started to develop my own work. And you know, it's important if you're thinking about becoming professional that you separate these 2 things in your brain. What do I need to do to pay bills, and what do I need as an individual to give me soul food? And I created a small body of work with the panoramic format, and because it was new and no one really had done, I mean, that format had been around since the 60s and no one had done anything with it. Magazines were very keen to feature it, and I got a lot of airplay through that. The internet was rudimentary at the time, and British Airways picked up on that and invited me to photograph what turned out to be 4 calendars. I mean, they didn't say come and do 4 calendars, but I ended up doing 4 calendars for them, and I got to about 44 countries flying first class. People say, did you get air miles? I said, come on. And I have to say that I haven't been back up the front of an aircraft ever since. I just look down at envy with great envy. You know, I do miss the pajamas though. You know, that's.
Yeah. And was that all panoramas, or did you also shoot other subjects when you were there?
It was mainly panoramas, but you may recall the rebranding that British Airways went through when they commissioned a lot of world art and they put it on aircraft tails. there was a much bigger emphasis in photographing people in the environment. And I'll show you one or two of the portraits that I took, because I had to go to countries, often to two different locations, one to find the landscape and two to find the people there. I mean, it's just unbelievable that companies had budgets to fund this sort of extravagance, you know, send a photographer around the world. You know, I start in February, I finish at the end of August, beginning of September, to get 12 pictures for a calendar. But I'm not complaining. That's Samburu Nature Reserve. And I used to publish that as a poster, and there was guys out in the Kenyan embassy that bought quite a few of them, because it said, the guy, I met the guy on a few occasions, and he said to me, it reminds us of what that national park used to look like before there was a lattice work of roads made by drivers driving off the roads to get clients photographs of elephants. And there was a bit of dead wood just in the foreground there, a bit of a branch, and I went over and to pull this out, and this, and I thought, ooh. And I looked, and there was a snake about that size with diamonds in its back, and I thought, that's got to be a nasty wee bugger. You know, if it's going to survive in that savannah, it's got to be evil. So I went back and I said to the driver, you know, I saw a wee snake there, and I said, it diamonds in its back. He said, well, that's a puff adder. I said, oh. I said, are they dangerous? And he said, well, if it bit you, you'd probably need to get your leg cut off. And I said, oh. So there was a wee few alarm bells ringing in his mind, and he said, I think we better get a guide, because you're not meant to be out the vehicles, and I was out the tripod. So I said, fair enough. So obviously that's, you know, you're going to have to pay for the guide. So we picked the guide up at 5 the next morning, you know, and I've got a pair of white khaki shorts on, a t-shirt as usual, and, you know, pre-dawn we're out. He turns up with a camouflage jacket and no gun. You know, I mean, you know, if there's a lion around, you know, who's it going to eat? The guy with the red legs and the white shorts, or the guy lying asleep on a Land Rover with a camo jacket on? You know who he's going for. But there's a lovely balance in this. I've kind of counterbalanced that right across there with the acacias, and this is a loliqui, and a very unfamiliar picture of the Lofoten Islands. That was in 1997, 96 actually, before digital photography and hordes of workshops you know, descended upon the Lofotens. I went across in the ferry, and all you could see was these angular mountains, and there was one called Navarin that's got a big flat summit, and I thought, I can get up that. So I took a sleeping bag and walked onto the summit, and you know, that cloud was holding back at sunset. It was holding back the sun. I never got anything, but I just saw the beginning of what I thought would be an inversion, and I thought the sun will probably appear at 2 o'clock, and it was just a bit of luck, but I woke at 2 o'clock with the sun in my face, and this scene in front of me. It's unbelievable, unbelievable. That's Zimbabwe and Matusadona, and you'd get big hippos that would stick there, you know. And I went out from Boomy Hills on a fast boat, and we stayed at a place called Water Wilderness there. And I said we, I was only myself, but there was a German man and his wife on holiday, and you've got your own floating little house on the boat, you know, with an ensuite, and it's a cabin that floats, and there's a restaurant boat, and you've got a canoe that you go back and forward to. So we get dropped in the restaurant boat for lunch, and this hippo come up, you know, breathing, and then back down, and she that, you know, his wife, she just had a look, and she said, I've got to leave right now. So she was taken back immediately. I think he was quite happy, actually. And at night, you know, I thought, you know, clever, you know, I've got my head torch here, so you're on the restaurant boat and you're scooping up the wine, you think, oh, this is great, and you get in, there's a wind up at night now, so you've got to row over into your cabin, and you put your head torch on, and you think, what's that? And you see 7 pairs of eyes very closely together.
Oh my God.
Crocs. And it kind of sober up quite quickly.
I can imagine.
Yeah. and deadly. I mean, again, 97, no one there all day. I mean, it's like a circus now, like everywhere else. But just amazing. That tree's on the deck now, it's down. And the Seychelles, hellish, somebody's got to do it. The restaurant there was only one restaurant at the time, Ladigue Island Lodge. They've got sand in the floor in the restaurant. It's great. So, yeah, it's a hard day's work. You don't need to bother about.
Not bad work to get.
Not bad work, Joe, at all. And down in Australia, that's in South Australia, it's Culliamurra Waterhole up near Coopers Creek. So I spent quite a bit of time down in Australia. These big red gums and coolabahs.
They are eucalyptus.
Yeah. Just beautiful.
Beautiful. Fantastic.
So
there's a story to this one. It's still a panorama.
It's still a panorama, but I made the transition to digital. And Hasselblad lent me. I went out on a sightseeing trip. I was there as an observer on a Russian icebreaker, and we went out to Svalbard and onward to East Greenland. And normally it takes 2 days to go there, but we had force 8 for 3 days, and some people just weren't seen. They were holed up in their cabin. But as we approached the east coast of Greenland, this tabular berg was here, and I was on the observation deck. I was shooting with a Hasselblad. I had to go to 800 ISO, and the backs don't perform very well at high ISOs. To get a 500th of a second there. But had I shot that on the panoramic, in fact, if I'd had the panoramic, I wouldn't even have tried to shoot with it, because you just wouldn't have got an image that would have worked. And this is really a good indication of how digital technology has liberated photographers and given them the tools that you would only be able to retain that in your mind's eye. But I'm able to share that with you now. So that was a change. I didn't buy the Hasselblad because I realised that it was too big and bulky for the type of work I do on location, but it was a good learning curve. And these are a few of the portraits that I took. And at the time I was shooting, these are all film, so it's Provia 100, and I'm shooting with a 70 to 200 millimeter lens down the 200 mm lens, and you get this amazing pull. But if you focus on the eye, the nose is out, and I'm shooting at f5.6, 4.56 by necessity, not because that's where I want to be. I mean, personally, I don't like images that are shot 1.4 or f2, where you've got the eyes sharp and the cheeks are out and the ears are out. I find that, this eye's out and this eye's in. I find that personally really frustrating. I just want to see more of the person. Depth of field's not that bad. But it's a very, very unforgiving way to shoot if you're down at 200 mm, because what I would do would be focus using the autofocus, switch it off on the lens and then recompose. And if your model just moves the tiniest amount, you're out of focus.
But the out of focus in the background is great.
It is. I mean, just knock that out. He was a gaucho, real. He'd just been chewing, his mouth blew there, and he was chewing blueberries. They're really hard guys, these. They live out with their dogs in the Argentinian pampas. I mean, they're just tough guys.
It's interesting to see that in sunlight, with the other two are softer light.
But the key with this type of photography, Joe, is you've got to move quickly. These guys pass, he's sitting on a horse, and you're trying to give them a bit of, this, and you're trying to use your body language to get some communication with them, and you've got to shoot quickly. This girl's from the Mangati tribe, and she was so shy, but beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And that scarification, that they cut and they use in Australia it's called the caustic bush, and it'll be some sort of similar plant that they use to inflame.
Permanence.
Inflame the wound so that it doesn't heal flat. But just striking. And I had a driver there. This was in Tanzania, called Elvis. And he was good at that, Elvis. And you know, he said, well, we're in a market there. He said, there'll be a man here that we'll need to sort this with. So, well, he was away chatting to the man. I mean, he's not the chief or anything, but he'll be someone that he needs to speak to. You know, what I would be doing is looking for a background. Now, you probably didn't notice the background in that shot, and that's the strength of a good portrait. Because if there is, you know, distractions in the background, you start looking at spectral highlights rather than the viewer's eyes, or the model's eyes, rather. So you can see I managed to find a door or a wall there that had the same sort of colour palette as the clothes she was wearing. She had a lovely sort of hide apron thing on, and it was quite striking. And that's a lovely picture. There were 3 of them there, and God only knows what they were saying. But, you know, there were 3 lovely old ladies having a bit of a laugh at the attention they were getting from me. And they were just lovely, absolutely lovely. I mean, you know, the woman on the right there, she's no teeth at all. And, you know, the woman is laughing. Her teeth are gone. And it's, you know, so many parts of Asia you go to, the dental, you know, state of people's mouths is just terrible. So we're on to another chapter.
We've moved on, I think. And I mean, I think you've moved on from film. And really that's what I wanted to ask you a little bit more about, because I mean, the digital revolution, if we can call it that, has been, for location-based photographers, has been quite profound. Has had a big effect on all of us in the way that we work, or maybe the format even that we use. So yeah, wondered if you can tell us a bit more about where you're at now.
Well, I mentioned earlier that I parted with my panoramic cameras in 2010, and it was a combination of the frustration of film and having it processed and taking 2 weeks and the cost involved in that to get an image onto your screen. But I'd had Scotland's Finest Landscapes published in 2014, and that kind of gave me some closure with that format, but I'd already kind of moved on by that mentally, and you know, I'm not a Monroeist. I don't even know how many mountains I've been on. It's never really been of that much interest to me, and there's many mountains that I've been on to, you know, 15 minutes from the summit, and I haven't bothered even going to the summit because I was where I needed to be. But I really felt that I'd said what I wanted to say about Scottish mountains and about these big vistas from the top of mountains. There's a lot of mountains I haven't been on, but they tend to be only mountains that Monroeists go on to for the obvious reasons. And they don't really appear in Scottish culture, they're hidden. And I realised that it wasn't a very good use of my time. And I realised that it was time to hunt new game. So I committed myself to working digitally, and when Canon came along with the 50 megapixel camera, that really was the catalyst. And that image is an image of Inchallach. I spent about 4 days walking over that moorland, not 4 days consecutively, but I did a lot of recce work to find some of these viewpoints. I wanted to interpret Inchallach in new ways. And that shot with a 400 millimeter Canon, probably about 220 mil. Again, not something I could have done with a panoramic camera. And you know, what I've been working on, and we're going to talk about that very shortly, is looking at the landscape in a different way. And you know, throughout that mountain era, I mean, you're always on the clock when you're going to photograph mountains. You're either walking up and you need to be there for a certain time, and you don't really have the luxury to explore the landscape that we, you know, are able to do in workshops, for instance. It was very much, you know, as I've written about many times, a military strike. You know, you had done the recon, which was the important part. You know, all the preparation was made, and it was just waiting for that weather window. And you would be literally up the mountain, you'd maybe camp up there overnight, and you'd be back down the next day. And you were so knackered usually that you had to work pretty close to the road the following day, just so that your legs recovered a bit. Because, you know, you're pulling up, then I was pulling up about 23, 24 kilos. Now I can get my bag down to about 18 kilos.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But it's still not really a Sunday Tata, is
no,
it?
Exactly.
So, you know, during that mountain period, there were many places that I walked through or drove through, and I made mental notes of them. And I've been spending time revisiting them with a digital camera system and tilt and shift lenses and zoom lenses, and I've been interpreting the landscape in a different way. And we'll talk a bit more about that. But as I say, that's one of the images. There's another one. That's the 2470. You know, there's a big emphasis on prime lenses. You know, there's guys that turn up my workshops and, you know, their bags are crammed with prime lenses. There are maybe 7 prime lenses there. And I have to say that throughout my photographic career, no one has ever said to me, "That's a really great picture, Colin. It's a pity you hadn't shot that on a prime lens." It's not relevant. I mean, does that look bad? For a 2470 zoom?
Absolutely, yeah.
And, you know, the quality, and personally, I like working with zooms because I can go into forest and I can move around and I can look at the trees and I see the shapes and the relationship of the space between them, and I can stop and say, this is where I'm going to shoot. And then I can zoom the lens to crop out extraneous light, for instance, that's behind these trees that are going to create potentially flare in the lens. So it delivers, you know, for any compromising quality, which I haven't seen, you can deliver the image that's in your mind's eye in the camera. And for me, that's what photography is
It's
about.
more satisfying.
Getting it right in the camera. Anybody can fiddle about in Lightroom. And as I say to people, if you get home and you need to crop a picture, you've got it wrong in the camera. If you've got to crop a picture to make it better in a way that you didn't actually think about, you've got it wrong. Get it right in the camera. So these are a sort of prelude to the project that we're just about to discuss. And one of the passions that I've had since I was a child, I'm known for photographing mountains, but I've had a real passion for wild birds. And I didn't want to become a bird photographer because I think there's a lot of really good bird photographers out there, and I think it's a subject that's you know, been very well serviced. So I wanted to do something to try and raise awareness of the demise of wild birds and get people's attention just by the sheer number of species that are falling. I mean, lapwing and curlew have dropped by about 60% since the 1960s. So this has given me another way to express a passion for the landscape and the habitats. This is in Lewis. That was shot this summer, and I didn't think it was one of these anti-cyclone days, as you can see, but the light had a little softness, a wee bit hazy out there. It sort of worked. And the other type of subject matter that gives me enormous pleasure is what I refer to as the intimate landscape. They're not close-ups, these pictures, but they're pictures within a small area, and I'm generally shooting from this sort of height with a 90mm tilt and shift macro lens. Absolutely pin sharp. And you get so much more. I mean, this man is the master of movements, but we both acknowledge just how useful that increased depth of field is.
Oh, it is, yeah. It's a lovely way to work as well. Yeah, you don't have to worry about stacking and the sort of when it starts to get quite technical then. Not that I have any objection to it, but I'd rather not do it myself. And
there's still a purity, isn't there, to having that single picture. That, you know, it was that instant in time.
Yeah, yeah.
And
absolutely.
you know, even with a shot like that, you're having to wait. You know, you're set up, you've got all your movements done, and you're waiting maybe 15 minutes just to that wind. Click, you got it. You can't do that. Anything that takes multiple exposures in the outdoors is not a good idea. I mean, yes, you can get HDR, but it takes multiple exposures and stacking. outdoors, everything's going to move. So, you know, what you gain one way, you lose another. But the great thing about these pictures is you generally want soft light for them. And those of you who've been to Scotland more than once will realise that you get quite a lot of soft light in Scotland. So, you know, if you go out in the morning, the sunrise doesn't happen, it's a flat overcast day, and you're interested in this, you can spend 3 days, well, you could spend 3 days, 3 hours in a forest or on a beach. And as we've talked many times before, Joe, it's that communing with the landscape. It's a form of meditation. You're completely 3 hours gone. Now, you might not shoot anything, but it's the hunt that's the important thing. And if with more time, we could talk about this hunting analogy, which fascinates me, and photography. It's the same thing. We're using the same instincts. We're hunting for pictures. So,
The Karakoram.
how did you guess? What gave it away?
I mean, it's really fascinating to go from that last image to this. Such an extraordinary contrast. But this has been a huge project for you and a real muse, actually, I would say, over the last 10 years.
It has, Joe. And, I've actually generated quite a lot of new work over the last 8 years, but I haven't put it on my website. You know, there's very little of the Karakoram project on my website. There's nothing of the project that I'm going to talk about in a minute on my website, because these are, I've spent 4 years with commercial sponsorship in the Karakoram recently, and I've been there twice myself. And I'm probably going to do another 2 years there in the Karakoram. And if I was updating my website and Instagram with these new images, by the time that book comes, which could be 3 years from now, people are going to say, well, that's not new work, that's old. Whereas if I've got a book with images like this in it, and I bet you there's more than one or two of you that'd be quite keen to buy it out there. So it's just, I've got to keep the assets underground because I don't want them out there. And that's the truth of it. But as you can see, I mentioned Galen Rowell earlier and his inspiration, but people are saying, what are you going to Pakistan for? But when you see pictures like this, you realise why I'm in Pakistan. Look at that architecture in the mountains.
There's nowhere else in the world quite like it, is there?
There's not. And you've got the Greater Karakoram, which my book will be concentrated on. I could spend my life, or what's left of it, trying to photograph the Lesser Karakoram, but the Lesser Karakoram tend to be a bit more Himalayan in character, places around Shimshal, and they don't have these spires and minarets and towers and cathedrals like you've got in the Greater Karakoram. Now there's Trango Towers. It's like a computer-generated image. And I feel that monochrome, black and white, really lends itself to this type of photography because the problem with any regions in the world that you're at high altitude at is that you've got two colours to work with, blue and white, blue and white, blue and white, and it's really dull and boring. And the monochrome palette, I feel, really interprets the graphics that are within these images.
Well, the tonal control is so fantastic, and I think this is the first time I've seen this image in colour originally, and I have to say this is amazing. It's a step up.
Thank you.
That's extraordinary.
Now there's K2. Now actually that was shot in 2004 with a 5.4 and a 400mm Apo. What is it? The lens?
It's probably a Simmer, Apo Simmer.
Yeah, Apo Simmer,
yeah.
400mm. And I think it was probably the only picture I took with that lens before I sold it. But there is the architecture that you've got in the mountains there, and you've got the Abruzzi Ridge, which is the main route up there on the east there. It goes right up, and you've got that knobble just under the summit there, which is the Serac, and the bottleneck is up the side of the Serac there, and that's really where all the fatalities take place, often in the way down. And behind there is a much smaller mountain called the Angelus, and that's killed quite a few people as well. So I'm on the Upper Vine Glacier there.
Oh, we've got 10 minutes.
I'm in the Upper Vine Glacier. We're looking down onto the Baltoro. You can't see much of it, and that's the Godwin Austen going up to K2 and K2 base camp. When the book's eventually published, I've never been a great fan of black and white and colour mix, but I feel with this book, the strong colour images like this one will help break up the black and white, because the Karakoram isn't a landscape that's got a lot of small details that you can use to break a book up or a project up. This is in the Biafo Glacier. These are unnamed, these mountains. It's up near Solokumbu at the head of the Biafo, and this is one of the regions I want to go back to. That's shot with a 300-2.8 Canon. And the Uli Bahayo Tower, you know, I sat 3 nights there, really bad weather, late snows, which was fantastic, but that sort of weather is just what you want. If you get an anticyclone, it's completely hopeless. And that's Masirda, Karim, and Hussein, who is my camera porter, and very importantly, my chair, which gets carried over the Karakoram. Very, very important chair. And this is just a little bit of video, which that's the road. This is coming out of Ascoli. That's Hussein there and Karim at the back. There was no point me getting involved in that. What could I do? Now the Karakoram's not somewhere you get by accident. That's the Braldu Gorge. Safest houses. You've got 4 of them to cross. And the Braldu's underneath. Feel myself swaying here.
So I'm feeling seasick.
There's a road in there somewhere. You know, you say you have landslides.
I can just see you there with a pith helmet.
Yeah.
A cup of tea.
No, I'm just getting away, Joe. Hurry, all went home. So that's just some of the journey. Fragile is what I'm working on at the moment. As I say, I'm looking at the habitats of birds. I spent 5 weeks last year in the Museum of Scotland. They've got the 6th biggest collection of eggs in the world, and I photographed these eggs, which were collected legally and were bequeathed to the Museum of Scotland. That's a guillemot, sorry, a Razorbill's egg on the front. And I'm just going to quickly go through this because I think we've got about 5 minutes.
Bit short of time.
I've categorised the project by habitats, as you can see. So that's a golden eagle's egg there. I mean, it's like a planet. The innate beauty in these eggs is unbelievable. Now, 3 generations have never seen what birds' eggs look like, and there's been a slight sea change in the attitude towards them. And I feel that it's a very good way to get people's attention about the demise of wild birds. That's a raven. You can see in 1937 it was collected. I've got all the data of where these eggs came from. A red grouse, that's what they're burning there. The golden eagle. You can see they're diptychs. So I'm using the egg, the colour in the egg, and I'm trying to match the colour in the habitat there. So there's a synergy, and the images are communicating at different levels. This is a capercaillie, 1908 that egg was taken. That's a sparrowhawk's egg. You can see the striations there on the pigment when the egg's been laid in the nest. Exquisite, absolutely exquisite. 6 to 8, there's a rook. Just a beautiful egg, really beautiful.
Incredible. And these are, you had to focus stack these, I believe.
Yeah,
thinking of
yeah.
that technology.
These egg shots were done. I had a full studio in there for a year because I was back in this year, and these egg shots are anything between 40 and 70 images that are stacked electronically. It's all done and controlled. It's a goldfinch, and that's pigment, not a crack. And isn't that exquisite? A hawfinch. Look at that egg. There's a sparrowhawk, and that's up near Killiecrankie, where you were recently, Joe.
It's lovely seeing the images together. I just think that's brilliant. And did you do that? I mean, the combinations, the editing in that sense, have you done it all on your own or with a designer?
Yeah, no, my designer and I've worked with her for 25 years, and
right.
I had to fight her on a few fronts. She had her own vision for this, but I showed it around to quite a lot of people, and they didn't like it. They liked my vision. They did. I was quite democratic about it. Oyster catcher, again, you can see the synergy. I mean, quite exquisite patterns. It's like an artwork itself. These are low-res pictures, so that's why it doesn't look great, for the artwork to keep the file size down. But there'll be probably one spread of a habitat with a bird or birds in it as well. That's a guillemot. I mean, just exquisite. I mean, it's like the cave paintings.
They're abstractions. They're really painterly, unbelievable.
White-tailed eagle's egg, taken 1869. It's the white-tailed eagle that's been reintroduced, but these are the eggs of the indigenous Scottish sea eagles, or white-tailed eagles, which are now extinct. European shag, and that was in Cana, that rookery there. On sandy with rum in the background. Again, they're low res, that's why they're a bit iffy. And you've got these two inverted triangles there. So
fabulous. And then I think just before we get to the end, we're going to talk very briefly about other sources of inspiration, because we've talked many times about how important it is for photographers particularly to look elsewhere, look beyond photography for ideas and inspiration. And particularly in our field, looking at landscape and nature, I think human beings fundamentally see nature as a source. I certainly do, of ideas, and I know you do.
Very, very much. And there's a few, I can't, whenever I get time I read, and obviously I look at a lot of other photographic work, but I read as much as I can. And this just says so much to me. Timeless and full of light, reminded me of the sublime innocence of the innate beauty of undisturbed relationships. And that's really what these landscapes in Fragile you're seeing. It is undisturbed relationships that I'm working in locations that are completely undisturbed. And this as well, I'll read it very quickly. The physical landscape is baffling in its ability to transcend whatever we would make of it. It is as subtle in its expression as turns of the mind and larger than our grasp, and yet it is still knowable. The mind, full of curiosity and analysis, disassembles a landscape and then reassembles the pieces. The nod of a flower, the colour of the night sky, the murmur of an animal trying to fathom its geography. Now, very quickly, when I read that in Arctic Dreams, it wasn't written about photography, but when I read Dissembling a Landscape, I suddenly realised what I'd been doing for 20 odd years and not really recognising that. We're disassembling the landscapes and reassembling them through our viewfinders. That's what we're doing as photographers. Brilliant. And I'm just going to go through this. That's a white-tailed eagle. Nan Shepherd, in the next quote, she's writing about eagles. And when one has realised, as probably one does not at first, that it is the power which binds the strength of the wind to its own purpose, so that the more powerful the wind, the more powerful is the flight of the bird, then one sees how intimately the eagle, like the moss campion, is integral to the mountain. Now, I can feel that, and I can shoot that, and I can communicate that without words, but I can't do what Nan Shepherd was able to do, which was really write in such a prosaic way about the relationships between the elements. She's comparing the wind and the strength of the eagle, and it being as integral to the mountain as moss campion. you know, that's someone that has got the real pulse. You know, she's
Really
got a finger on
understands
the pulse of nature. And just finally, Nan Shepherd again. And I used that picture, which I'd shot at a different time. I see a tree hung with light, a minimal tree, but exquisite. Its branches delicate with light that sparkle. I mean, how simple a way to describe a scene like that there. You know, but she can do it in words. What we're trying to do is it non-verbally.
Your father.
My father.
We had to put him in. He's a bit of a legend in his own right, isn't he?
He is, and you know, he's got more hair than me, Joe. And how did that happen? You know, I want to know. But you know, my father, he retired in his early 60s, and he came with me on some of the British Airways trips, and this was us in Patagonia, and you can see the wind is one of the main sort of features of that landscape, and he is physically holding that tripod onto the planet so that I can attempt to try and shoot something of the mountains there. But we've spent a great deal of time both in Scotland and in other parts of the world, and he was a great help in helping me set up sales and distribution, because he wasn't ready to do nothing. So when he retired, he went out there, and his motto is, "I've never met a stranger," and I've got to say to him, "Come on, Dad, we're going."
Oh, it's lovely, and it's lovely to see that. I think finally we're going to finish on something that actually originated from our discussions on environmental politics, which go back a long way, and which we're both passionate about. And it's so difficult, it's immeasurable. What we do, does what we do make any difference? Does it affect anybody? Does it inspire? Does it influence? We hope so, but it's very hard to judge. And when I sent this question to you, you simply sent this back.
Well, it's a DVD. This is my daughter Alexandra, and she had to put a presentation together, and she independently went onto my Lightroom catalogue and pulled out the images she needed, and she has put this presentation together, which I'd like to share with you. It's her singing, by the way.
You think you own whatever land you land on. The earth is just a dead thing you can claim. But I know every rock and tree and creature has a life, has a spirit, has a name. You think the only people who are people are the people who look and think like you. But if you walk the footsteps of a stranger, you'll learn things you never knew, you never knew. Have you ever heard the wolf cry to the blue-born moon? Or ask the grinning bobcat why he grins? Can you sing with all the voices of the mountain? Can you paint with all the colors of the wind? Can you paint with all the colors of the wind? Come run the hidden pine trails of the forest. Come taste the sun-sweet berries of the earth. Come roll in all the riches all around you. And for once, never wonder what they're worth. The rainstorm and the river are my brothers. The heron and the otter are my friends. And we are all connected to each other
Alexandra Prior.
Fantastic. Well, that's a pretty stunning way to end. So even if you've only influenced one person, what a way to do it.
Well,
Colin, thank you very, very much. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to say, but it's been a journey.
It certainly has, and one that certainly enriched my life. You know, I was so glad I took that step of faith all these years ago, and you know, it will continue as
You've still got the drive, still got the energy, still got the
as long
enthusiasm.
as I'm upright and breathing.
Absolutely. Colin Prior, everybody. Thank you very much, Colin.